So this is where I ended the last video, taking off the front clip of my Jeep CJ7, and I'm going to continue on with taking the tub off. Here I'm unhooking the brake linkage from the top of the pedal underneath the dash, under the dash, going into the brake master cylinder. Here I'm undoing the lines, and then we'll undo the bolts that hold it to the firewall. I'm using an air ratchet here. I said bolts, but I think it's nuts actually. I think there's studs that come through from the pedal assembly. And go to pull it out, and I had forgotten to unhook the vacuum line. There's a vacuum line going to the vacuum assist canister. So there, I'm pulling that off. Now we got it. There we go. Then this is an automatic transmission. It's in here now. That's part of the reason for taking the body off. I'm going to switch over to manual. But there I have unhooked the linkage from the shifter, which is on the steering column on an automatic. Then I'm taking the bolt out of the link on the steering column. Then there's a little cover. These are Torx screws. I'm going to take off the steering column. Of course, this is inside, looking underneath the steering wheel there. And then I've got to disconnect the electrics. There's one long connector along the side, and then there's two more connectors up above. I didn't get filmed well because my hand was covering them up. And I'll take the bolts out. There's 4 plates that go through the firewall, hold this flange on the steering wheel. And there's 2 more, and that full flange will come off the steering wheel then. One of them I couldn't get to with the air ratchet, so I'm just using a wrench. And then there's 2 that hold it up, and they also hold the pedal assembly in. You can kind of see I'm getting up in there with a universal joint and an air ratchet. When you undo these, the whole steering column will fall down. Then you just got to fish it out of there. You got to kind of turn it, especially on this since it's an automatic, so it's got the linkage stuff that you got to fish through. Here's the throttle cable. Unhooked it from the pedal, and then squeeze this little connector on the end of the cable jacket, and then it pushes back through, and you can pull it out of the firewall. Here I'm reaching underneath and undoing the speedometer cable. This is a mechanical speedometer, CJ7. I'll push that up through the firewall. Then I'm going around front, and I'm just going to remove all the wiring off the front of the firewall. It's a nice simple CJ7, so there isn't a whole lot. And then the heater core hoses. Somehow you have to remember which one's in and which one's out. It's not terribly important, but you should probably get them back in the same spot. Then the last thing on this Jeep is a breather hose that comes up from the transfer case. That's an option you might not have, but that keeps the breather of the transfer case up out of the water when you're going through the creek. Now with all that removed from the front, we're going to go into the interior. There's a plate that covers up the, in this case, just the transfer case shifter. Eventually we're going to have to cut a hole in that to make room for the manual transmission shifter that's going to come through it as well. A lot of screws, and then it was glued down. The rubber boot was glued down. So I got a putty knife under there and just kind of worked it up. Same thing with the big plate. Once I got it off, I'll undo the linkage, unscrews from the transfer case shifter. It'll pull out of there. Next I'm undoing all the body mounts, and this Jeep only had 3 along each side. So between the front and rear tires. Now there should be 4 more in the back, 2 right in front of the gas tank, and 2 that go through the bumper. But this Jeep only had the 3 on each side. Whoever built it last just didn't put the back ones in. That's another reason, and there'll be another video on the body mounts coming. But it's another reason for taking this tub off. I got to fix all that and make it right. And then my buddy JT had happened to stop by, so we started lifting it up and just putting wood blocks underneath it. We're going around corner by corner and putting 1 or 2 blocks in and just lifting it up a little bit at a time. The plan was to get it high enough that we could put some sawhorses, some long homemade sawhorses, underneath the body and then roll the chassis out. And it was getting pretty sketchy. They were getting pretty high. Funny. We get it about this high, and we got the sawhorse underneath it, and then I realized I hadn't disconnected the gas tank. So there was 2 hoses back here in this corner that needed to come off, go into the filler, and 2 wires that run over the other side of ground, and a gas gauge wire. So those had to be disconnected too. There you can kind of see in the lower right-hand corner my sawhorse, or maybe that was just a board laying there before I got the sawhorse up. The sawhorse thing, it was just getting too high, too shaky. Wasn't real happy with it. You can see my blocks of wood in there. Just getting a little shady. There's my sawhorse. Yeah, and I wasn't a big fan. So I abandoned the sawhorse thing. I was getting it up in the air, just me and JT were lifting each corner, sticking blocks underneath it. Got a sawhorse onto the back end, and it was getting up pretty high. It was pretty unstable, and then finally got it up on the sawhorse, and this isn't good enough. It was just shady. It was going to fall, or possibly. So we just shut down that night. The next day I had 3 buddies over, JT and Schwartz and Juice, and each of us took a corner and we just lifted the tub off. That's probably the safest, best way to do it. It's not that terribly heavy, they're big dudes. So chassis out from underneath it, tub's sitting here. Got plenty more to do. The whole reason for taking it off, the body mounts are just wrong. Got to fix all those. There'll be a video on that. I need an emergency brake since I'm switching to manual transmission. That's another project, switching the automatic to manual. Need emergency brakes. There are none on the back. It's got discs on the rear, but there's no emergency brake setup. And then just little stuff, plumbing, wiring. The 2 wires that come back from the front to the back to the fuel tank for the fuel pump, there are 8 sets of butt connectors and solder connections, and that's 2 wires. I don't know why. But stuff like that just got to be cleaned up. And then the exhaust was hanging from the tub, it needs to be hanging from the frame. There's only 1 hanger, it needs to be probably 3. Little stuff like that. We'll get her whipped. Plenty more videos to come. Like and comment below, subscribe to the channel. Click on the merch button to get yourself a hat or t-shirt. There's even a button there for support this channel if you want to buy me a beer if you found this handy. Jeep on!